Welcome to the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast, where we hope to inspire you to embrace your God-given gifts, skills, and passions in order to lead with confidence. We want you to remember that you are fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God, and you are fully loved by Him.
You have been designed on purpose by God with unique gifts and passions in order to love and lead those around you. I'm your host, Esther Littlefield, a pastor's wife, business owner, mom, and writer.
And I'm Esther's co-host, Holly Kane. I'm a wife, mom, and business owner. I also write at hollykane.org, where I focus on my passion for women's ministry.
Together, we chat about important issues that Christian women leaders face. In addition, we interview other women just like you who lead in various roles, from church to community to business. Through this podcast, we offer you encouragement, tools, and resources to help you on your leadership journey. We are so glad you're here with us. Hi, friend. I'm Esther, and I'm here with Holly today. So, Holly, how are you doing?
I am good. How are you?
I am awesome. So, can you tell us what we're going to be talking about today?
I can. Today is our 1-year anniversary episode.
Woo!
We are so excited to be celebrating 1 year of the podcast. It's crazy that we've made it this far. Can you believe it?
Not entirely.
I can and I can't. It's a little bit of both.
Yeah. Yes. So if you are a new listener to the podcast, we want to say welcome. We're so glad you're here with us and that you have found the podcast. But I want to mention that today's episode is going to be a little different than the normal, because we are just going to take some time to reflect on the past year and discuss our favorite episodes. So if you haven't been listening since the beginning, or even if you have, this episode hopefully will give you a chance to just have some fun with us. And also you might find that you want to go back and listen to some of the conversations that we talk about. Because even if you've been a loyal listener, there's a chance that maybe you haven't listened to every single episode. And if you're a new listener, then there's probably a lot of episodes that you haven't checked out yet. So also in episode 55, which was just 2 weeks ago, we shared our lessons that we have learned from our first year of podcasting. So that was a really fun episode to record.
I enjoyed that one.
And if you haven't listened to that, then again, if you're curious just to hear kind of some of the lessons we've learned along the way, then you could go back and listen to that. So before we jump into our highlights and our favorite episodes, we just want to take a minute to say thank you. In the past year, we have had over 50,000 downloads of the podcast.
So crazy.
Yeah, it is. It's awesome. And it's just really, I think we talked about this on episode 55. Like, we didn't really set number goals when we started. No. We were just kind of like, okay, God, whatever you want to do with this, do it. And I think this definitely has surpassed what I thought would happen. Yeah, so we want to take a minute to just thank everyone who has been part of making this happen.
Yeah, so we want to thank all of our listeners and subscribers. We really feel like we couldn't have made it this far without you. And we especially want to give a shout out to the members of our private Facebook community, where we have lots of discussions related to the podcast and different things we talk about on each of the episodes. And we have really enjoyed getting to know each of you. So thank you so, so much.
Yeah. And even a lot of our episode topics and some of our guests have been in that group, and, suggestions have come from that group. So that has been so helpful to us.
Yeah.
I also want to thank everyone who has shared the podcast, who has left ratings and reviews. And I really want to give a special thank you to all of our guests who have taken the time to come on to the podcast and share their story with us. Just for myself, and I know for you too, Holly, it's been such a blessing to be able to talk to each of the women that we've had on the show. And I know that their story and their contribution has just enriched the conversation around leadership as a Christian woman so much.
Yeah.
So it's really been a blessing. And I think especially the guests who were on at the very beginning, because they really didn't know if this podcast was going to stick with it, So thank you for those of you who were like at the beginning and you didn't know even the podcast hadn't even launched yet. And you were like, sure, I'll be interviewed. So really big thank you to those people. And I also just want to say a thank you to my team who helps get this podcast out every week. It's not all just me doing it, despite what Holly might have said in the last episode.
It's a lot of you.
It's a team effort. I mean, I have now an editor who is part of the team and someone that writes the show notes and, we someone who schedules the social media. So it's really a team effort. And I am super thankful that I do not have to do it all by myself.
Yeah. And I'm thankful for those people because they have an expertise that I do not have.
Yes.
And so as much as I want to help in some of those areas, I just would be terrible at it. So I'm really glad that there are people who have gifts and skills. We talk about this a lot, and that they're willing to use them to help us keep this thing going, keep this train chugging along. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. So before we dive into our top episodes, so what we're going to do in this conversation is Holly and I each went back through and really thought about what were some of our favorite conversations from the past year. And I will just say that was a super hard thing to do.
It really was.
Because I feel like we could have picked all of them. I kept saying to her, like, I want to say all of them. So anyway, but we did narrow it down to like a few each for each of us. But I do want to give a shout out to our top 5 episodes from the past year, according to the number of downloads that they received. So there's really no way for us to know like exactly how many people listen to the episodes, but we can say this is the number, like we know these episodes were the top 5 in terms of number of downloads. So I'm going to start with number 5 and work my way up to number 1. Okay. So we'll just make a little drum roll, So episode 5, the number 5 in number 5 place was episode 42, Leading in Women's Ministry, Doing What You Love and Building a Team with Sandy Fuelling and Holly Kane. That's you. So that was in the 5th place. In 4th place, we had episode 30, How Your Personality Impacts How You Set and Accomplish Goals. And that was a conversation between myself and Jill McCormick. And that was really fun. And 3rd place is episode 45, Developing Confidence in Your Gifts and Managing Multiple Roles with Brashana Miller. Super awesome conversation.
She was so good.
Yeah, I know you love that one, Holly.
I may have mentioned it a bunch of times after.
Yes. Yeah. In 2nd place is episode 17, How the Enneagram Can Help You Nurture Healthy Relationships with Beth McCord. And that was in our relationships series. And I loved that conversation. And then in 1st place is episode 1, which was Holly, you and I, and just sharing our leadership journey.
When we were super green and we're still figuring things out.
I don't really want to go back and listen to that one. And really, to be honest, I think the reason it has the most downloads is simply because it's the first episode. So most people, when they're checking out the podcast, probably go and listen to that one and just kind of figure out if they even like us and want to keep listening. So I don't know. Anyway.
Which is a little nerve-wracking because we were, like I just said, we were pretty green and it was the first one we ever recorded. So I'm sure we sound way more scripted.
Yes. So if you're a new listener and you go back and listen, just know it may be different than what it is now. So,
and that may be a good thing or a bad thing. We're not sure.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to dive in. So I'll start by sharing one of my favorite conversations. And that was episode 3 with Abby Reich Rockenbach. So let's take a minute and listen to that clip. Are there any tools that you use that you have used in the past that have helped you to understand yourself better? And what would you say you've learned from doing that?
Hands down, the best tool I ever did was taking that spiritual gifts test.
Okay.
I took it and then I had 2 people closest to me take it. Because sometimes I think we don't have the clearest vision when it comes to ourselves.
Right.
And I think through the study of the spiritual gifting, then sometimes I think, and I don't know if it goes back to that childhood being bossy or whatever, it's that we need to claim our spiritual gifting because obviously we can develop pride with that, but when we acknowledge it, that is not pride. That would be the same as saying, I have brown eyes. God gave me brown eyes.
Right.
Nobody thinks I'm being prideful if I say I have brown eyes, but it can be perceived as being prideful if I say my spiritual gifting is in teaching and in leading, even though I have no more control of that than I do the color of my eyes.
Right.
So I think that was the first thing for me, because again, I think I was the reluctant leader. And so stepping into that and just owning that, I think was the best thing I could do as far as being more effective.
Right. And I think that goes right in line with the idea of embracing our identity, right? Because like you said, your gifts that God has given you are just what he's given you. It's part of who you are. It's part of your identity. So would you have any words of wisdom for any women that maybe are struggling with embracing, who they are or how God has wired them and how you've done that in your own life?
So okay. So we're just chatting for reals here. Honestly, I think what I realized is that whenever I say, oh, I'm not a leader, oh, I'm not good enough to do that, then I'm basically calling God a liar, calling his promises lies. And so there came a point where I don't care what the world said. I don't care what mean kids said. I don't care. Even the things that I say to myself, if they're not truthful, then I have to go to the only place in this world that we can find absolute truth, and that is the Word of God. And I'm not talking about finding verses that I think verses are taken out of context. So let me be very clear here. But when I find the true meaning of who God says I am, it's not about thinking more of myself or less of myself. It's about death to self. And so to me, death to self gives you a confidence, because my confidence is in God who created me.
Okay, so I loved how in this conversation, Abby was talking about the fact that, one of the ways that she has been able to discover her gifts and understand herself is through just learning about her spiritual gifts. And I loved how she compared like acknowledging your spiritual gifts to be kind of the same as like just acknowledging your eye color. Like it's something that God has given you, and it's not being prideful to say, yes, I have the gift of XYZ. And then the other thing that I loved about this clip was just how she pointed out that if we are diminishing the things that God has given us or the truths about how God has made us, then we're actually calling him a liar. And that was like, ooh, that's some tough love right there.
Yeah.
But we need to turn to God's word for our source of truth. And I just also loved how she pointed out this idea of confidence, that we can have confidence when we actually are looking to God who has created us. And that's the source of our confidence, not anything about something we do in and of ourselves.
Yeah.
So that was absolutely one of my favorite clips from that episode, but the entire conversation was powerful. And I would say if you haven't listened to that one, that was our first interview, and she was just amazing.
Yeah, I think that when I listened to that, I was like, oh my gosh, like she knocked it out of the park. And it was such a moving episode, just her talking about her story and just all the different things that she's gone through and how God has really shaped her life now from all of those things. It was just so powerful. And I mean, as we mentioned before, we're so thankful to those first few people that we were interviewing, and Abby she set a really amazing tone for all of our guests that have come on. So
absolutely.
And
one other thing I loved about that conversation is she talked about herself as a reluctant leader. And again, I think that I've heard that theme from so many of our guests. Like they've come into this place of leadership, but not out of any sort of ambition that they had themselves to become a leader, but it truly was a thing where they recognized God has put them into a place where they need to step up and be a leader. And that was her story. So if that's kind of what you have experienced for yourself or what you might be experiencing right now, then definitely go check out episode 3 with Abby.
Yeah, that was a good one. I'm glad you picked that one. It was hard to pick these because there were so many that I loved. So
yeah. Yeah, I hope our guests, if we didn't pick you, please don't be sad because
it was very difficult. I had a very long list and it was hard
Yeah.
to narrow it down. So
Yeah. All right. So Holly, what was one of your favorite conversations?
Yeah. So the next one for me is episode 8. And that's an episode where you and I talk about the key to becoming a better leader. And in this clip, we talk about how we receive feedback. So let's listen to it.
So I think this idea of asking for feedback actually works really well with the first point. If you are humble enough to be able to understand that you don't have all the answers and that you're not, maybe always doing it the best way, you are more open to receiving feedback and open to learning how you can change. So I think humility, honestly, is probably a first step before asking for feedback. Because if you're just going to ask for feedback and not accept it or not take it very well, that's probably not a good place to start. So
yeah. And oh, sorry. I was just going to add one more thing on the feedback thing is like when you ask for feedback, stop talking.
Yeah.
Like you have to actually listen to the feedback and wait before you respond because I mean, I know my first response when I hear feedback is to immediately come up with the reasons why I did X, Y, or Z, or the reasons why that feedback isn't true. Right. But that's not being humble. And that's not actually going to help anyone. If I don't listen and take time to process the feedback before I respond, then it's not going to do anyone any good. And my team isn't going to want to bring me feedback anymore if I immediately get defensive and shut it down.
And I think too, we are sort of in a culture, maybe in a business world where we constantly have to respond back on things. And so I think it's important to say when you receive feedback, it's okay to say, thank you, I'm going to think about that. And period, that's the end of your sentence. It's okay to say that. There are some people who need to process things for a lot longer than others. And it's totally fine to just say thank you and move on with your day. And however you need to, maybe jot it down or something so that you can think about it later. And it's okay to go back to that person later on and say, you know what, thanks a lot for that feedback. I really thought about it. And, you're right, or you were somewhat right, or however you want to.
Right. Yeah, you don't have to agree with all the feedback that you receive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it's better to take that time to process it before you respond, especially if it's difficult feedback.
Okay, so I think I really enjoyed this clip because I've been on both the receiving and the giving end of all of these things. So, in other words, leaders have both done this to me and I've also done this to other people.
Yeah.
So, for me, I really resonated with this when we talked about it. And just for me, when I realized these points that we were talking about, humility, stop talking, don't respond, it just gave me this freedom from the expectation to have a response and be ready at all times. And that was kind of a big stumbling block for me because I didn't realize how much I needed to process feedback. And I wasn't giving myself the permission. And so I would get really worked up and say stupid things or, have lots of big emotions about stuff. And whenever I would have employee reviews or discussions with supervisors or any corrections, it just felt like they were really personal and really weighty. And having the freedom to be able to respond later after thinking about things was really huge for me in how I deal with conflict and confrontation. And then on the reverse side, knowing and being aware of those things has really changed how I give feedback and correction to others. And so, I don't know, for me, I just really resonated with that. And, I just, a little caveat, I've also done some personal work on how to handle confrontation better. But honestly, this was a big part of it. Sometimes the stumbling block is just giving yourself permission to do the thing that you think you're not allowed to do.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, it often is a very wise thing to step back and wait before you respond to any kind of criticism. And it's often our gut instinct to just lash out or respond defensively.
Yep.
And that's, again, most of the time that is not a Jesus-like thing to do
Right.
in our response. And so giving yourself time, and sometimes when you give yourself time, you calm down and you don't even need to respond. And then other
Right.
times you do need to respond, you do need to take it to the person, but you've given yourself that time to process, to talk to God about it, and to come up with a reasonable response to the feedback.
Yeah.
And I think this was an episode that we did early on. And I think throughout the year, as we've kind of had a lot of conversations around this, I've just come to recognize the importance of feedback in leadership is it's so important to be able to receive feedback as a leader, but also to know how to give it to people in a way that doesn't feel horrible to that person,
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
I don't think I realized just how big of a portion of leadership this was. In previous times, I guess I would have thought it's just, the position or just me kind of being in charge and, steering the ship. But it's really more about relationships with the people that you're working with, and receiving feedback and giving feedback. It is huge. It's really one of the only ways you can move forward and progress in a positive way towards your goals. So,
right. Yeah. Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
So we're going through, we're kind of going in order of the episodes, throughout the year. So yours is next again. So you have the next one. So go ahead and tell us. Okay.
Okay. So the next one is episode 11, where we talked with Jenny Catron, and she talked about her book, The 4 Dimensions of Extraordinary Leadership. So I really enjoyed that framework. So let's listen to that clip.
I would love if you could share a little bit. You talk about the 4 different styles of leadership or approaches to leadership. Could you tell us a little bit about those and why you feel it's important for leaders to understand those?
Yeah. And that book was really birthed out of a journey for me to figure out, what does it mean to lead well? I think all of us recognize that there's a lot that is not flashy about leadership when we really get down to it. I think a lot of times we're drawn to leadership because of the position or the influence or the idea of, it's going to be so great. When the reality is, true leadership is just challenging behind the scenes work, helping draw out the best of others and guide them and direct them and align that with the mission of the organization. And those two things don't always just synergistically happen. And so in my own growth and development, this was particularly at the church that I was at in Nashville. I was there for 9 years. We went through a lot of growth and transition in that time. And what I began to discover is that there were really 4 key ways, 4 dimensions that I needed to lead from if I wanted to lead in a healthy way to my staff. And I discovered that those were relational leadership was really critical, that the relationships that I was building and how I was intentionally connecting with people were really important, that spiritual leadership was essential. Now that feels obvious because I was in a church, but I will tell you that when you're working in a church, and you probably know this, Esther, when you're working in a church, it doesn't always mean everybody's getting your best spiritual leadership or influence.
Very true.
The strategic part of me that needed to help, drive us forward. And then the visionary side of leadership, of that we have to keep a vision in front of people. So I was really camping out on those 4 things and discovering that in my own leadership development, relational, spiritual, strategic, and visionary leadership needed to flow out of me on a regular basis. So I began writing about that, and it was becoming the book that I was working on. And in the process of writing the book, I was reading back through the scriptures because I really wanted to just look at Jesus' life as a leader. And, I wanted what was coming out of that book to be as healthy a representation of what leadership should look like as possible. So God had really prompted me go back through and read through the life of Jesus and just really look at his life through the lens of leadership. And then I was actually starting to skim through Mark chapter 12, where, they're asking Jesus, the controversial questions about taxes and resurrection. They're trying to throw these curveballs at him. And they say, what's the greatest commandment of all? And he responds with what is known as the great Shema, or the great commandment. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and then love your neighbor as yourself. And so I'm like, yeah. I know that stuff. And I'm starting to move on. And I felt the Spirit kind of prompt me, slow down a little bit and look at this. Because if the great commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And then the second is to love others. And we all distill that to love God, love others. And we're like, okay, if this is the two most essential things that we should do as followers of Christ, how does that apply to leadership? And, I go back all the way to that conversation with one of my bosses in the early days of my music career. And he said, you've got to learn how to love people if you want to lead them. And I'm like, okay, there it is. Love God, love others. Here's the essence of leadership is, in that commandment. But then the aha was, Jesus says, with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And I thought, what we've extracted those and we simplify that verse to love God, love others. But everything I can tell from Jesus, he didn't waste words. And there was usually a purpose behind what he said. And so I began studying the Great Commandment because I was like, okay, wait a minute. I've just assumed I know and understand this. But what I learned is that the essence of that command and the reason why there's the clarification of loving God with heart, soul, mind, and strength is that it's our whole being, that it's everything in us. And as I looked at it more, I was like, okay, wait a minute. I've been wrestling with these 4 concepts of leadership: relational, spiritual, strategic, and visionary. And there's heart, soul, mind, and strength. The heart is the relational side of leadership. The soul is the spiritual side of leadership. The mind is the strategic side of leadership. And the strength, it comes with vision, because without vision, people perish. So vision provides strength when we're talking about it from like a leadership context. And so it became the anchor to say, you know what? Every leader needs to lead with these 4 things. It's got to flow out of who we are. If Jesus is saying we've got to love God and love others with our whole being, then when we lead, we need to lead people with our whole being. So it became the framework for leadership for me and has actually really, I think, made my leadership so much more healthy. Obviously, it's a journey and I get it wrong a whole lot more than I get it right. But that framework really shapes the way I look at my life as a leader, and it's been extraordinary for me.
Okay. So the thing I really loved about this clip was just the relation between the framework that she mentions and the verse that matches up with it in Mark 12:30 and 31. And I love how she expanded kind of on what we've boiled down to: love God, love others. And I love the fact that she mentioned, Jesus really didn't waste words. So if he thought that it was important to put in love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, then that's something that we should pay attention to. So I really love how it's sort of your whole being, everything within us that is part of that leadership framework.
Yeah.
And I have yet to read Jenny's book. So I'm sorry, Jenny, but you are on my list and it's a really long list.
Well, we are reading that book right now in the Confident Leader Club. So
I know.
Just use this opportunity to read it.
I need to do it. So one of the things is that oftentimes we're stronger in one area versus another. And this concept just really reminds me that growing in healthy leadership, you should be striving to grow in all of these areas and build each other up in all of these areas.
Right.
And I know that Jenny was mostly talking about leadership within the church, but I really think that we've made it clear on this podcast and previous episodes that how you lead in Christian settings should really be no different than how you lead in a workplace or secular world. And so bringing this leadership framework into that space, I think, is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is that it reminds me that the people that we lead also need guidance in all 4 of those areas. So they need guidance with relational, spiritual, strategic, and visionary leadership. And so growing in each of those areas ourselves really only helps those that we're leading.
Yeah.
And, I really think that for me, that was just a really well-rounded approach that I appreciated. So,
yeah, I think that one of the things I love about her framework and her book is, it helps you to identify like where you're strongest, which one you're strongest in. But then you also, like, she doesn't say, okay, just use your strongest thing and then don't work on the other ones, because this is a biblical concept. But also, I think it is a good thing to think about in terms of, okay, if I know my strongest is relational, for example, then I might need to find some other people to surround myself that are really strong in the other
Right.
areas to help leading whatever effort, we're leading.
Exactly.
So it's a good kind of, it's a both and, like
Yeah.
be aware of your strength, but
Mhm.
don't not try the other things. Don't grow in the other areas, but also recognize that you may need to have some supporting people on your team.
Right. And it's really important to kind of identify not just your strongest, but also your weakest, because that's generally the one that we will shy away from, the one that we don't want to give any attention to, the one that's, the hardest to really work on. And so, like you said, working on that, number one, but also surrounding yourself with people who have that as a strength, really, for me personally, and depending, I think, on your personality and how you learn, for me, that's a really great way to learn.
Yeah.
Watching someone else do it and watching someone else really dig into their strength and really be an example to me. And that it is really a huge way that I learn. So,
Yeah.
So,
Awesome.
Okay. So you have the next one.
Yeah. All right. So for the next one, I chose episode 17 with Beth McCord, talking about how the Enneagram can help you in your relationships. So let's take a listen to a clip from this conversation.
Now, here's the thing. When your listeners find what their core longing is, they're going to find that your spouses, your employees, I don't care who it is, your parents, your kids, we all have cisterns that we dig. So Jeremiah 2:13 talks about that we've dug cisterns, which are like wells. But the thing is, so we've done all this work. We've dug a well. We've put bricks around it so it will hold water. But what God says is we've forsaken Him, the spring of living water, and dug these cisterns that are broken. So just think of even a clay pot, if you will, and that it's cracked, and you start putting in water in it. Like it's not going to hold. So we have all these things that we're trying to fill our lives up with. It could be our business, it could be our spouse, our kids, you name it. Not that these things are bad and wrong. What's not good is that we rely on them or these things to fill us up. And they're each like little thimbles, and they have a little bit of water in it, and then they add to your cistern, and you're like, really? Like that's all you're going to give me? And we get upset because they didn't satiate or satisfy what we need. And then not only do they put a little bit in, it doesn't hold water. So then it's gone. But right next to us is the spring of living water. So we can get all we need and then some from Him. And He fulfills the longing that we have. When we know that our longings and our desires and everything's been taken care of by Him, and we actually rest in that, we will then move forward as leaders in such a different trajectory, whether it's in our family life, because now with my husband, I still long for him to think my presence matters. And I get tripped up from time to time when we're in arguments, and that message always pops up in my head. See, you don't matter. You're present. And I'm like, wait, what? No, that's not true. He's my best friend. I do matter to him. So we have these core lies that are swimming around in our head, and we have to capture them and give them back to the Lord and believe what's true. And so having all of those kind of internal conversations with ourselves, not berating ourselves or beating ourselves up, that only makes things worse. But by saying, no, what's true is I'm unconditionally loved, forgiven, and free in Christ. And here are the things that He has done for me and on my behalf. That frees me to live in this fullness, even if our spouses don't come through for us, even if our kids don't come through for us, even if our employees don't come through for us, because they're not, but He already has. And so if I can put all my stock in that and build off of that, then if I'm filled up, if my whole being is filled up with all that spring of living water and continually there, then when people throw in a little thimble of water, it's kind of like, oh, that's cool, because it's like we're already filled up. And so it's just this like sweet, oh, I know that you really meant that to nourish me and love me, but I'm not so desperate that I want to pull them down or hurt them in the process.
All right. So I loved this part where Beth was talking about the fact that all of us have what she calls a core longing, and we try to fill it up with other things in our lives. So she talks about this verse where it discusses digging cisterns and the idea that we fill them up, we try to fill them up with all of the things in our life that might fulfill us, like our relationships, our work, our hobbies, our passions, things like that. But those never actually completely fulfill us. And so she just talks about the fact that the only person that can fulfill our longing is God. And that in order to really have healthy relationships, it starts with being completely fulfilled and having God fill up that cistern first and foremost. And he is the spring of living water, it never runs out. And whereas the other things that people can do for us or other things can do for us is just a small thimble, is kind of what she said.
Right.
So I just feel like that's so foundational to leadership, because as a leader, if I am looking to have my work or my marriage or my team or anything else in my life be the thing that fulfills me and gives me identity, then I'm always going to be disappointed and I'm always going to be striving and unsatisfied.
Yeah.
So she talks about the fact that we need to capture the lies, the lies when we are telling ourselves, oh, that person didn't do what we wanted, and therefore that's the reason I'm not fulfilled, etc. We have to capture those and turn them back over to God.
Right.
And so, again, I just felt like this whole conversation was really powerful. And as we mentioned at the beginning, it was one of the top ones that have been downloaded, on the whole past year.
Yeah.
So it's definitely resonated with people. And I think for the reason that not just because we talked about the Enneagram, which is a hot topic, but we also talked about relationships, which is a core part of having healthy leadership.
Right. I think the thing that I really appreciate about this episode, and going back to the core longing, I think that when we view longings or those voids in our lives in sort of a general way, I think that we sort of miss, I guess I would call it a vice almost, like the one thing that we kind of tend to go back to, the thing that's kind of our crutch or the thing that we have the most difficulty with. And so I think that when you identify that, you can become more aware of how you are trying to fill it and what you're using to fill it, because there may be different, you may have, one thing that you are using to fill it in one sort of season of your life, and then you move to another. And from sort of a general standpoint, you're like, okay, well, I kicked that. And now I'm, now it's just another season of life. When you trace it back to that core longing, it's really the same thing. So for me, I really think that is kind of key and very important to identify. And so I'm glad that she talked about that. So,
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she talked a lot in that conversation too, just about the fact that, despite using any tool, whether it's the Enneagram or anything else, like that is not where any transformation happens. The transformation comes from the gospel.
Absolutely.
And from the saving relationship with Jesus that we have. And so I just feel like that is, again, a foundational part of what we believe and what we want our listeners to experience in their lives. So,
right. Absolutely. I totally agree.
Awesome.
Okay, the next episode is actually another in our top 5. It's episode 42, where we talk about women's ministry. And Esther interviewed myself and our good friend Sandy, who is also the women's minister at what used to be both of our churches, but now just Esther and Sandy. And so I really enjoyed that episode. And so why don't you just go ahead and take a listen?
So I think one of the just amazing things that we're talking about today is, Sandy, you started off by saying that you didn't feel like you could be a leader because you couldn't do everything. And now we've talked about the fact that, you had Karen and then you had Holly coming in, and now we're talking about this whole team. And so I think that a lot of women in church leadership specifically tend to have that feeling of needing to be able to do it all and have all the gifts and manage all the things. So Sandy, can you just share some of the advantages that you have found in having Holly alongside of you and then also having a larger team? What are some of the advantages that have been beneficial for the women's ministry of our church? with
I
that?
think the biggest advantage is that we all get to do the thing we love.
Mm.
And when we're working in the thing we love, then we can put together something that's really excellent, because you don't do the thing you love poorly.
Yeah.
So Holly taking on all of the logistical aspects of the retreat freed me up to just sit down with the Lord and have time to really work through what our teaching was going to be, what the focus is. She just freed me up to do the part of the retreat that I really love to do, which is putting together the program.
Mm-hmm.
And if I had to think about all of those other things, I would have been distracted from the one thing that I love. So for all of us, we get to work in the place we love. The person who's in the kitchen is working in the place that she loves. And when there is passion, there's always going to be good results.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you, Holly? What do you see as some of the advantages?
So I think the reason that I really love how we have things sort of set up is we almost have a natural, this is going to sound weird, but a natural succession, if you will. Sandy poured into Karen, and then Karen poured into those other leaders, and then Sandy poured into me, and then I poured into those other leaders who are able to pour into their team. And then everyone who's working is able to pour into our guests. And it's just kind of this trickle effect down. And not to say that Sandy isn't pouring specifically one-on-one into other people, because she most certainly is. But I feel super privileged because I feel like I was just like drinking from a fire hose every time that she would like give me the wisdom that she had gotten from God. And you get to, Sandy specifically pulled out things in me and pointed out things in me that I didn't know were there. And it sounded like she had the same experience with Lori.
Yes.
And I have been able to have the same experience saying those things about other people, because after I heard what it sounded like, then I could definitely see the things in other people and say, listen, girl, you have got this. I can already see it in you. You can't see it, but I can see it. And it's when we call gifts out in other people that they feel and we feel able to step into those roles. And God just kind of goes, yep, they're absolutely right. I've been forming that in you. I created that in you when you were born, and I gave you those gifts, and I want you to use them for me.
Okay, so I really enjoyed this. I love what Sandy said about when we follow our giftings and strengths, it frees others up to follow and work more deeply into their gifts. I loved when she said, when there is passion, there's always going to be good results. And I think that so many times we try to manufacture results and we try to do all of the right things. And what we really need to be doing is empowering people within our ministries to find what their strengths and gifts are, to call them out in them, and then encourage them to live fully into that. And it's not so much about that person sort of having a successful life. That's not really what it's about. It's about the body and enriching the body of Christ, and what happens when you fall fully into your gifting. It encourages others. It frees others up to do what they're meant to do. And so I just really loved that idea. And I loved that we got to talk about it, because a lot of times when you're doing a ministry like that and you know you have something great, you can identify it. But when you really get to talk about it, it just brings out the gratefulness even more about it. So I enjoyed that. And then the second thing was when we talked about the mentorship that happens when we're working in our gifting, and when there's a culture of really encouraging people to lead within what they're doing. I think one thing that really impressed me when I listened to this clip again is that it's not about Sandy. It's not the Sandy show or the Holly show. Our team was really about giving everyone who wants to serve the ability and the opportunity to be a leader in their area. There's room for everyone's leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have a leader that takes up all the space in the room, it really stifles others from stepping up. But when you have leaders who support and encourage others to serve in their gifting and lead in their spaces, again, it frees each and every one of us up to grow well.
Yeah.
It's almost like there's no ceiling, there's no limit. Whatever God wants to do with that gift, we're allowing him to do it. And we're not really putting a cap on it. So
I love that. Yeah. And I fully agree with that. I love this concept of allowing people to step into leadership, even sometimes before you think they might be ready,
absolutely.
and giving them the chance to just get their hands dirty, get some experience under their belt, under the guidance of another leader, because then that gives them the chance. It gives you a chance to give feedback, to lead them as they're leading their smaller group of people.
Right.
And I've been in places where I, as a natural leader, have been under another leader who didn't give that space and didn't give that opportunity. And it's very disheartening and very discouraging. And then eventually it makes you want to quit. Because you don't get the chance to test out your skills, and the other leader is just too, like you said, kind of deciding that they're going to do everything.
Right.
And that is not a healthy thing for that to be taking place.
And I think that it even makes it harder for those people who don't identify as a leader, but definitely have that skill set. It's difficult for those people to kind of come into their own, if you will. It's difficult for them to eventually identify and kind of run with that because the other person is doing everything, or they are so heavy-handed in everything that those people underneath of them don't have the opportunity to identify their own leadership.
Yeah.
And so you kind of end up with a ministry that is really dependent on that one person. And that's not a great place to be.
Right.
Of course, we should be dependent upon each other as, a community and as a group of people working toward a singular goal. But if one person falls out, the whole thing shouldn't collapse. There should be people who have been sort of groomed or poured into who are ready to kind of step up to their next level of leadership. So that's really what this whole thing that we're talking about in that mentorship is all about. So
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So go back and listen to that one, especially if you have any interest in women's ministry, helping a women's ministry get started or flourish. That one will be excellent for you. So the last clip that we have is the one that I chose, which is episode 43 with Jenny Randall. So I just love the entire conversation, but we will just play a clip from that right now.
I believe wholeheartedly, if you are a believer, you have a ministry. And it's in the everyday minutes of your life. Are you glorifying and enjoying God? That is our purpose. And your physical job may be different from mine, but we're all on the same mission, And it's just like taking the grandiose of what is my calling and just making it simple. Like our pastor taught on purpose one day, and it shifted everything for me because I do carry such vision. So when he's like, okay, our purpose is to glorify God, I'm like, oh, that is so easy. Not that it's easy. Of course, every day it's like, what are you, but it's easier than writing 700 books and you know what I mean? Like it takes that pressure off.
Yeah. The pressure of trying to find the one thing.
Or chase that big dream, and it takes the pressure off. And all we have to do is show up. And if God says, go over there and talk to that person, just be willing to do it. Or have a good attitude when your computer blows up in your face. Like, just show up and bring him glory. And I think I struggle with, because I love investing in believers. And I think a lot of people struggle. Well, I'm not like a pastor, or I'm not a leader in the church. So how do I function as a Christian? Like, how does that work? And I think it works by understanding your creative nature, understanding the power you have through Jesus in your workplace to just show up and see how he uses you and being open to being used. I think more than ever, we have to step into the uncomfortable areas of leadership. I think as Christians, we need to be the ones leading these large organizations that are influencing the world, whether they're Christian or not. I don't care. Like, if you're a leader and you can step into those places, you should be the one making the decisions. You should be the ones downloading strategy from God if he gives it to you and implementing it for your teams and raising up leaders underneath you. Like, that is how culture changes, is when we go into those areas where it seems dark, when we can enter in and be like, you know what, this is about serving God, and he's calling me to go into this uncomfortable area. And it might not look like a standard quote unquote ministry, but it is a ministry, and it might be hard work. It might be uncomfortable. You might have to battle for stuff. I remember I was in this boardroom meeting. I'm on a board of a local organization here, and there were these two lawyers, and I love them, and they were presenting something to the board, and they were passionate about it, and they were telling a story, and they were getting emotional, and they were fighting. They were like, justice, like this moment. And then this one woman paused. She laid out the case. Like, I was sold. She did a dramatic pause. I mean, I say that dramatically, but she paused and then she said, but that's just my feelings. You can do what you want to. And I like dramatically slammed my hand on the table. And I think as women specifically in a place of leadership, your voice carries power. And I think a lot of the times, we can diminish our voice because we either don't think we're of equal value, or, well, that's just my opinion. And I think I want to just challenge everyone listening, like, God has given you a voice, and it's time we have to use it. And if you are in a high place of leadership, you need to place high value on your God-given voice, because there is a reason you are in the place you are meant to be in, and walk confidently, not in yourself. There's one thing to be self-confident. It doesn't matter about your accolades. It doesn't matter about your awards. It's not about people's praise, but it's walking in a God confidence in who he's called you to be. Actually, it's not even about who he's called you to be. It's about who he is. You know, this is like gospel, like who God is, and then walking confidently in the areas he's sending you. And I think especially women in the leadership, they need to place value on their voice and step into the dark areas where they're called to lead, and lead powerfully, and don't ever, ever diminish your voice. And I've done that plenty of times where I have shrunk back and said, oh, well, say similar. Oh, it's just how I feel. Do what you want. But no, God, I think more than ever, God is equipping leaders, creatives, and men and women to use their voice powerfully for him to influence culture and change in businesses, change in the world around us, because that's how it's going to get done.
Okay. So one of the things that Jenny and I talked about was this whole idea of ministry versus business. And we talked about whether there's a difference. And so that was a big part of the conversation. But one of my favorite things that she said is basically, doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're a believer, you have a ministry.
Yeah.
And all of us have something that we can be doing in our everyday life, which is a ministry. And so that, we discussed that it takes the pressure off from finding the one thing, or the chasing the dream, or just, striving constantly to figure out, what am I supposed to be doing with my life? Instead, just stepping up, showing up where you are. And then the other thing that she challenged us to do is to step into those uncomfortable places where maybe it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel comfortable, right? To step up, to start sharing your voice about some of the cultural things going on, or even in your workplace, maybe you end up having to step up and say some things that you truly believe will be impactful, but they may not be popular. And and that's a big part of leadership is being wise in your words, but also being bold And again, she talked about the fact that we as women sometimes kind of do this thing where we diminish our voice or our opinion. Oh, it's just what I think. This is just my thought or my feeling.
Right.
And that she just challenged us as women to stop doing that and to start looking at step up, make a difference, change culture, and how can we make an impact? And it was encouraging to me because I think I've often thought that I've always had, not always, I have often felt like, oh, I have something to say, but ooh, I don't know if I should say it. Ooh, I might offend somebody in the room, or ooh, I might step on some toes. And, obviously not being brazen about it. I don't think that's what she's saying, is to be any kind of, rude or brazen about it, but to be bold and to not hold back. If you feel that God, the Holy Spirit, is giving you something to say, then to go ahead and say that.
Yeah, definitely. So. I love the idea that your calling is not necessarily something super specific. Like there's this tension. I feel like there's so many tensions in following Jesus, between one idea and another. And, we just have to really rely on him to kind of find where he wants us to be. But there's this tension between the general calling that every Christian has and God has something specific, a specific will for my life. And we get so lost in between those two spots. And I just think that this is a really great conversation to have, because I don't think that not knowing your specific thing should paralyze you. Yeah. Because there's always a general calling on every Christian's life to serve and to love and to be generous and to, I've heard it said, like, if you're looking for where you're supposed to serve, look down between your 2 feet. Yeah. That's where you're supposed to serve. Right. If you're put somewhere, that's what you're supposed to be doing. Yeah. And oftentimes it's through that serving that God shows us specifically what he wants us to do. And so I think that idea, that conversation needs to be had more and more, because we keep hearing, like, what's God's specific will for your life? And when you find it, And that's great. And there's nothing wrong with looking for it and seeking after him for that. But don't forget that there is already something you should be doing. There's already somewhere you should be serving, in your local church, in your local community, with the people right around you, with your family. You have already been given all of that stuff to handle well and to steward and to do what God is asking you to do. And so I really love that conversation. Yeah. And just the kind of gentle push that she gives women to, not diminish what you feel God is saying through you. So I really like that conversation.
Right. I loved how she basically said that Christians should be changing culture. Yeah. And that doesn't happen when we're all just sitting in our houses wondering and praying for God to show us what to do. It happens when we go out and start living our life and glorifying God in everything we do, whether it is working in the soup kitchen or serving in our church or being the CEO of a large organization. She was really, I know she has a passion for encouraging Christians who are working in the secular marketplace, and really, you can make a difference there. You can change culture by influencing what's happening in the secular space as well as the Christian space. So don't hold back and go do things.
Go do the things.
Go do the things. Yes. That's our podcast right there.
Yeah.
All right. So that really wraps up our clips. And so we hope that you enjoyed this conversation and these clips. But again, we would love to hear what your favorite episodes were from the past year. So in our private Facebook group, we will ask this question during the week of our 1-year anniversary. We'll ask you, what was your favorite episode? We would love to hear your feedback and know, is it a different one than what we talked about, and why? So I think that it's really fun to hear how God uses each conversation to impact different people. And that's what's really cool about this whole thing too. What's the question today, Holly?
Okay. So what is the most embarrassing fashion trend that you used to rock?
Oh my word. Oh man. Okay. So can I just say, like, all of the 1980s?
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
No, okay. So I picked. I have two things. I know I'm breaking the rules. First one is my hair. Like I rocked the bangs where you had to use a curling iron and curl your bangs down.
Yep.
I had a nice solid curl under on the front, and then also take the second half of your bangs and curl it up back. Like a. I don't even know it's like a big. I don't know, something.
I call
opening.
it a donut.
A donut? See, okay.
Because when I did it, I would kind of like brush the ends a little so that they were a little like wispy, and it kind of just made this nice circular donut on your forehead.
So donut, I'm picturing like something opening its mouth and like having a big... I don't know. So I rocked that. I also rocked like the side wings, where you had to take the hairspray and bring your hair out and like spray it for like 5 minutes and wing it out. Okay. If you were born after like, I don't know, when was this popular? Late 80s, early 90s, I think.
Yes. Yeah.
This
so
was
I want to say middle school for me. So that would have been early 90s.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So if you were born like late 80s or later, like you have no idea what we're talking about, and you can just thank the Lord. Okay. And let's pray this trend doesn't come back.
Oh my goodness.
Also,
I'm not going to be rocking it if it does.
No. Never again. The other trend that I did pretty much rock was the scrunchy socks.
Yes.
We wore like these socks that went all the way up your calf. Yeah. But then you scrunched them down and made them like look wavy and scrunchy.
Wavy, yeah.
And sometimes you had 2 or 3 different color socks on. So it was like layered socks. I just picture like the 80s aerobics videos. And that's, if you see that, you'll see those socks in those videos for sure.
Yeah. Our feet were warm.
Oh, yeah. Oh my goodness. Okay, so Holly, if we can, what we're going to try to do for you who are listening, we might try to find a picture of one or more of these fashion trends and put them in the show notes. I can't guarantee it because I'm praying that I don't have a picture of this, but I'm pretty sure I do. So, what about you, Holly? What was your embarrassing fashion trend?
Okay, so the 2 that I'm going to mention have actually come back in style, and it's hurting me a little bit. Okay. The first one is fanny packs. That's a new thing. That's come back. But when I was a kid, I had the fanny pack, but they were like bright neon colors.
Oh, yes.
You remember that? Mm-hmm. And so you would, sometimes it was cool to wear it like right in the front. Sometimes it was cool to just kind of like turn it to the side a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
But, you had your like slap bracelet in there. And you had like those jelly bracelet things.
Oh, yeah.
Or, a ring pop,
Yeah.
Some Lisa Frank pencils that were in there.
Okay. So that's one. So you had the fanny pack.
Yeah, I'm really dating myself.
Okay.
Okay. And then the second sort of trend that's back, but it's not completely the same, is the tying your t-shirt or your shirt like on the front or the side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But when I did it, it was not a knot. I had this big plastic like buckle thing that you would slip the shirt through, and it was off to the side. And the great thing about it was those little things that you bought were not very expensive, and you could have one of every color. So you would match your shirt. So I remember my most favorite outfit when I was in, I think, 3rd grade was a pair of neon pink shorts with a white t-shirt that said, "Don't worry, be happy," with bright pink letters and the pink buckle on the side.
Okay, wait. Was the shirt, tell me this, was the shirt homemade with puff paint? Because I had one of those.
It was not, but I had lots of those.
Okay. Oh, I think I probably did have one made with puff paint that said, "Don't worry, be happy." So,
and that was always the worst because after like 5 washes, the puff paint would start to peel off. So you'd be sitting in class and like your "don't worry" turned into "do worry" after you pulled it off.
Oh man.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, okay. So It's a
Yeah.
good thing that we keep these questions to the end because people are like, all right, guys, we're done. So,
Okay. I'm just going to mention one really quick one. I'm not even going to
Okay.
expand on it.
are you good?
But you in your car or wherever you're listening to it, if you did this, you're going to laugh. Banana clips. That's all I have to say. Okay.
Oh, okay. So we will also ask in the Facebook group this question, and we want to see pictures. If you have a picture, you got to go grab your cell phone, snap a picture of your most embarrassing fashion trend, find a photo album at your parents' house or something, and share it with us in the group.
We want to see.
We want to see it. Oh, all right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for listening, and we appreciate you. Thank you for celebrating our 1-year anniversary with us, and we can't wait to jump into year 2. Thanks for joining us on the Christian Women Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, come and join us in our private Facebook community. We would love to get to know you better so that we can make sure the podcast is providing what you need. Plus, you can share your questions and ideas, and you'll be surrounded by incredible Christian women leaders. To join the group, visit estherlittlefield.com/group. Now, don't forget, your leadership matters, and it's time for you to embrace your gifts and lead with confidence.
Have a good day. Every time. Every time.